Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision API, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. Today, I'm joined by Grace Sharkey, a freight tech analyst at FreightWaves. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited. I love the name of this podcast as well. It's a good one.
Yeah, we've gotten a few comments on it. I also get tickled by it every time I get a compliment like that. So thank you. But Full of Ship.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe it makes a little comment about the space in general. We're just trying to bring some transparency and reality and just help make things better in actuality by sharing stories like yours and experience like yours from people who are making a difference. So, and speaking of what you do, maybe we can do a little introduction. I hear you've had some experience running brokerages, freight tech. I'd like to hear more about, and I know there's something about the Great Quarter Gals. I don't know the details on that, but maybe you could tell us about your experience with brokerages and freight tech first.
Definitely. So, right out of college, I actually had a lot of friends that were working for brokerages at the time. I used to fundraise at Michigan State for student scholarships and things of that nature, and um, it was the skill set really works well in a brokerage. You're on the phone, you're making phone calls, you hear no a lot, you actually hear no more. So CH Robinson, Coyote, a lot of the big guys would come to our fundraising group and pull a lot of us out of college into the organizations. And by the time I was looking to graduate, a couple of my friends had kind of already started bouncing around those organizations. So when I started looking for jobs, I actually found a startup brokerage that was right in Lansing, and it was perfect for me because my dad was going through some health issues, so I wasn't fully prepared to leave and go too far. So I started with this brokerage startup. It was three of us. When I say lack of technology, I mean we were using spreadsheets to book loads, using old filing cabinets to keep track of PODs. It was the full-on startup type of mentality, and it was just absolutely great because we started growing very quickly, and it allowed me to really manage and help grow a team in a brokerage and figure out how to build a training program and how to add technology to improve our processes and even learn just the ins and outs of different invoicing capabilities and things of that nature. So we were able to build that organization up. Hired a lot of friends from college as well, up to about 100 employees, and by the time I left there, about $80 million in revenue. So it was a really great opportunity for not just learning more about the space, but learning how to build a business in transportation, and not just the operation side with the legalities and things of that nature. That's how I met a lot of people within the space. Cassandra Gaines was a huge influence with me and growing that business. Ryan Schreiber was a huge help. He's part of Carrier Direct, and they really helped me think about the industry differently, especially from a tech perspective. This was 2013 when I first entered the industry, so it was really starting to go from uh, like absolutely no technology being used to different offerings being available out there. Even between the legacy systems, we're coming out with some really great solutions. So at some point, my job really became that aspect of things. Like, how do I help build this brokerage? How do we, especially at the time, we're trying to go from cradle to grave to buy sell. How do we do that? How do we implement technology to make that transition easier? And how do we change our operations and change the way that certain maybe representatives are working in order to completely fulfill that switch over. So that gave me about 7.5, 8 years of experience that I just really appreciate, not just for this industry, but just for even building a business in general. You get to, you learn the ins and outs of HR and things of that nature. So it really helped me, I think, grow and get, I tell people, like a master's in business at some level. Now I'm not going to go pay for one now, that's for sure. And now, here I am at Freightways, and it was funny because when I left that organization, I really wanted to start consulting and helping some of my friends who are looking to start trucking organizations or things of that nature. Some of them are looking to go to brokerage, but a couple were actually looking to become dispatchers and actually buy trucks. And then, I've always loved Freightwaves. I've always followed it, even when it was like a blog. Well, Ryan and a couple others really pushed me to take this job, and I really wanted to join the group, not just to be a part of such a fun, growing business again, right? Like Freightways is such an incredible startup that's so fun to be a part of content wise. But what I really wanted to do was help write about freight tech in a way that help people understand what tools they might need and what tools they don't. I think a lot of times technology writing can be very much so like, this tool work for everyone, and that's like completely not true. So I really wanted to join the team and figure out a way to write about technology, in a way that captured the audience that it was meant to capture, and be truthful and honest of what that solution is for. And honestly, now that I'm in it, helping some of even these PR teams help communicate their messages a little bit more impactfully than they have in the past. So that's kind of where I am now, and it's exciting to be here, and I really love being a part of Freightwaves and being able to create new content with them every day.
And what's the story behind Great Quarter Gals?
Yeah. Andrew Cox was a part. Kevin Hill and Andrew Cox had a show called Great Quarter Guys. It's actually one of my favorite shows because, I've recently gotten more into investing and learning more about, the ins and outs of that, and especially within our industry, right? We're in it so much. It's fun to be able to invest in some of these companies that we talk about every single day. And so as Andrew left Freightwaves, the spot was open, and Kaylee and I kind of came together and like, wouldn't it be cool if we took it over and rebranded it, right? Made it Great Quarter Gals, and made it something that not only showcases that there are females in finance, but that we know what we're talking about, and we can give an opinion, and it can be impactful. And so it's something that we started talking about, I think, I want to say in like October, and starting into the new year, we were able to come together and finally pull it off. And we're just going over our new intro yesterday, which I'm excited for everyone to see in our next episode. And we're hoping to not just show people that, you can get these messages and without a desk full of males in front of you, but also showcase a lot of female leadership within the space as well. So we have a lot of guests that we're working on bringing on that I think would be really great for our audience to see and hear from. But even more so, we're excited to kind of take over the show and show people that, it's females have a voice in this area and are knowledgeable in this area, and maybe push more women to go into finance. It's something that I've just in this role and talking with investors, I rarely get to talk to a female investor, and that's something I'd really like to see change. And so if this is something that we can do to kind of push that movement, then I am all for it. And plus, I love creating new content, being on different shows with the team. So kill two birds with one stone in that area.
Amazing. I love seeing lots of different perspectives and backgrounds brought to the table. So let's make sure we get a link to great quarter gals into this podcast as well onto the page or wherever the appropriate spot is. But yeah, I'll definitely be giving it a listen as well. And yes, as you said, you have a wealth of knowledge on the freight tech landscape, the investment landscape in this space. There's been a real explosion of freight tech in the last handful of years. Would be curious to kind of get your read on, when did this start happening? Why is it happening? Has it been consistent over the last handful of years as well, or have there been kind of dips and upticks as well? And where do you think this is going in light of current economic times as well?
Yeah, so I think that the industry has just been so fragmented that it's been tough to implement technology. I think for a lot of, if you look at like even a traditional brokerage, like without being 100% operationally efficient, you can still make very good money off of that business. So I think for the longest, it was just kind of like if we need to add this service or add this type of infrastructure, people would just throw bodies at it, right? Like, okay, well,
yeah, we could try harder. We could hire more people.
100%. And I think it just got to this point where you were using more powerful technology within your everyday life that you weren't using in the office. And you get to a point where it's like, how come I can't have something like this that I use at home that would make me even more productive here at work? And I truly mean that in like almost every type of role, even to like truck drivers, right? Like a lot of them still use CBs, but like a lot of them are using their phones to communicate. And it's like, how do I have this powerful technology in my hand or not near my hand because I'm driving safe, but but how come my ELD doesn't work as well as this does? And that regulation came about, right, where they had to have the ELD. So like it really was like a shock factor of like how far behind we are just as an industry. And I think that probably, I mean, truly, I think around the time that I kind of started coming in the industry is when people started to see that. And I think at first it was more about, okay, let's invest where it'll make us more operationally efficient, right? Where we can have our employees do more with less, right? Which is always smart. But now we're getting to this point where it's starting to showcase, right, what in all these earnings calls and with companies' bottom lines that like, oh, we're so unproductive that we can't even get product to the shelves on time. And that's when you start seeing all these really great tools with visibility and different types of data insights that are going to allow people to be proactive. So it's like, I think we're going through, I'd say over the last like 2 to 3 years, clearly when COVID hit, really spiraled it, but there's this wave that's less operational and more proactive, right? Like how can we know that these things are going to be an issue ahead of time, warn our consumers, set our inventory up appropriately, and be able to be resilient through these times. So I think the first wave came just more out of regulation, and we have to improve the way that we worked and to honestly make more money. And now we're at this point where it's like, a customer, I would just be so surprised if customers are still letting brokers or logistics providers raise rates without an explanation at this point. With so much out there and so much insight, like I'm not giving you more money unless I get a really strong why. And that's like one thing I think is really important. And I'm really interested in seeing with a lot of more of the traditional type of logistics providers, like how are you going to make it through this time if you're not investing in some type of insight or some type of data solution that's also shared with your customers? Because shippers are getting smart and they're starting to invest in it themselves. And it's I think that's what's been really interesting over the last like 6 months is like you see all these companies really starting to invest in their own supply chains because they're realizing the mess that's been underneath those uh, underneath those operations this whole time, right? So yeah, I think definitely COVID and being in the situation where it's like, well, I can't just go into a warehouse and count inventory. That visibility has become just a huge piece of all of it.
I'm curious. I see a lot of the industry from the containerized freight perspective. So
Mhm.
a lot of my conversations are about freight moving over the ocean and then in containers, via truck, via train. But something that we've kind of noticed is, even looking at the space in the last 5, 6 years, it seems like there's a lot of shifting amongst the tribes now. Being, to your point, uh, you know, uh, the shipper, the cargo owner, they're asking, why are the rates getting higher? Why, why? And we have started to see some companies adjust this. You look at companies like Maersk, which are very much saying, hey, we're going to do it all underneath our own umbrella. The services, the carrier work, the technology, um, where that may have been served by forwarders in the past and 3PLs who had their services and their tech offering. And then you see some cargo owners trying to do it all their own and maybe just booking directly with medium to small carriers and getting a lot of diversity. What are you seeing in terms of how are the tribes being unsettled across the landscape right now by tech?
It's I had a really good conversation with an investor a couple weeks ago about this, and it almost feels like the barrier to entry of like controlling your own shipping is starting to change. Like, and that's I think why it's coming off that way. So like I guess the best way to explain it, because I think a lot of times people like sit back and like, well, what is this like? What's the end? What's the end goal of like visibility? Like, what is its like practical use going to be? And I look at it like if you were to go back, not even like let's say like 5 to 7 years, and you wanted to start a business, right? You would have to invest in a point of sale system. You'd have to invest in a website. You'd have to put together. Figure out where your warehousing is going to be, how you're producing your product, um, your social media marketing campaigns, stuff like that. Well, now you have systems like Stripe. You have so many different website systems. It's so you could literally start like a t-shirt business in like an hour for like less than $300.
And
And
never write a line of code in doing it as well.
exactly. And that's where I see freight tech right now, is that they're making it so easy for companies to truly gain insight and control their own supply chains, that when you say like the why, it's because they are starting to see that they could do it. When you look at like different, like one of my favorite companies right now is Orderful. Like they have they're creating an API into EDIs for multiple companies out there, whether it's like Walmart and big retailers and brands like that. Which is going to make it so much easier for like a logistics company to connect with and work with a brand in a different way, instead of saying like, well, can you send me over your loads via email? It's like that's a joke. Like, no, I will not, because there's so many different ways to communicate and know what's available load wise out there than there ever has been before. So it's funny to me that you're seeing it too on the container side, that they're able to like invest in it themselves, because that's where I see this technology is like making it so much easier for these companies to invest in themselves than having to have a consultant type of firm or a provider do it for them. And so I always worry like, not worry, but I'm interested in like what the traditional like 3PL and 4PL will look like down the line, like what those roles will be like. As I just don't see it being these sales reps that are scrounging for sales here and there. I think it's going to be so much easier for a representative to handle tens of millions of dollars of transportation spend without with getting out of work at 5 o'clock like a normal person should be, right?
To your point, it's very easy to imagine, if not in the not now, if certainly not in the very near future, if you're a service provider of some sort and you show up at the table trying to win someone's business and you say, well, we'll send you all of the information in an email, you're going to lose your seat at the table. You're going to actually
Yeah, so
disqualify
fast.
yourself
Yeah, so
from being able to win the business. And I think, to your point as well, if you go back a handful of years, the industry was very kind of esoteric and opaque still. It was almost a little, unless you're like inside it yourself, like if you're trying to create a product, you're that t-shirt company, you didn't really know how the the sausage was made to get your products on the shelf, sort of situation. It was always this is this chain of companies that say they all work together and they figure it out, and I place the order and it kind of shows up 4 to 7 weeks later, and it was consistent enough. But with uncertain times, people start to ask why, and I think there's been this transition from opaque to a lot more transparent. It's not transparent yet, but far more transparent than it used to be, just about how the system works behind the scenes. And when people ask why, they ask, why does it have to be that way? And getting back to that topic of freight tech company explosions, it looks like that's a good kind of bellwether of that transition from an opaque, esoteric industry to a more transparent, open industry, because you have an explosion of companies who say there's a better way of doing it, and there's a better way of running it as a business, and there's a better way of changing the overall impact and efficiency of the system. And I was kind of curious, you've been in the space 2013, you said, and especially it sounded like more on the kind of domestic trucking side to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
But even with the ELD mandate, have there been waves of investments, or what's the pattern? If you were to turn this into a chart, is it just been hockey stick of investment in companies, or have there been kind of that typical early adopters, that moment of kind of disbelief, oh, it's not taken off the way we thought it would, kind of thing? What's the pattern been in the space?
I would say it's definitely still like that early adopter, but more of like themes have been waves, I would say. Like, what's really interesting is like during the ELD situation, like that was almost like a forced investment. Like you had to invest in that, and it hurt a lot of companies. I mean, that came at a time where trucking I want to say that was at the same exact time that the broker bond increased as well, and the insurance was increasing for carriers. So there's a lot of carriers that ended up leaving or just going bankrupt because they didn't have the ability to invest in this type of stuff. And it was just a different market, right? So what's just so interesting to me like right now is I feel like there's a lot of really great different type of carrier like trucking type of tools that are available at a time where like trucking companies should and can actually invest in them. So I think that's like when I think of it more in like waves. Like I would say right around like 13, you started seeing a lot of these you started to see a lot more of these like cloud-based systems starting to pop up, right? Like instead of having to have these like huge servers in house and having to keep those up to date or having to rent those from a legacy system, now it was, everything was available in the cloud, which you kind of needed because employees in particular, like they didn't want to have to like remote log in and have to work from home. So to be able to say, nope, just you log in here at this website was a lot easier for companies to get their employees to to understand and be able to use. So like that was like the big one I saw at first was like legacy systems starting to move to cloud and a lot of these like TMSs that were much more mendable than a lot of the ones that you had seen on the market, right? And then you started to see more of like the document imaging. Like I would say a lot of it was around like the TMS experience, right? So then you had this like document imaging and being able to capture BLLs and PODs so that you could get paid quicker, which spiraled into a lot of like the banking type of solutions, like more of like the Triumph Pays and Hub Trans, where it's like, okay, now we realized from investing in the document side of things how this really does affect cash flow. So how can we make cash flow easier for companies, right? So then that came out of that. Now you're at this situation where visibility obviously comes out of the pandemic because everyone wanted to know where their stuff was because one, you couldn't go into warehouses for a period of time. I mean, that was like such an odd time, right? Like when the shutdowns first happened and you had customers who are like, yeah, we want to ship, but we can't. It takes 4 guys to load a truck and we can't have 4 guys near each other, right? So you needed to really be able to visualize your supply chain as a whole. So I think that's why you see that now is like out of survival. Like we need, in order for my business to survive, I need to be able to see it. I need to be able to know what's happening. And now I'm just, we talk about like the driver shortage and stuff like that, but I think what people are realizing as they're starting to invest their time into learning more about that is it's not really a shortage. Like we really don't like calling it a shortage at FreightWaves. It's more of just they're not working, they're not operating like they should be. And it's because technology hasn't really helped them until now. So I see it as more of like themes instead of it's like you said, early adopters in some of those areas, but it's like these really interesting themes that have been coming out that have really excited me, especially I think the carrier end of things. Like, it's what makes me nervous is this market will flip. That's just how this industry works. It will flip at some point, and the people that usually eat that are the drivers, and that's when you see a lot of our bankruptcy articles start coming out, right? So I just really hope that they are using this time and this extra capital to optimize their operations as a whole. Because if you can start to figure out how to end your driver's dwell time and how to maybe do relay runs and figure out how to let your customers give your customers a different experience as a carrier, you're going to be really good for the literal long haul, right? So that's kind of like more of what I've seen there.
Please join Grace and I on part 2 as we continue the discussion on all things logistics technology. We'll cover how volatile markets combined with supply chain woes are impacting earnings calls and conversations at the board levels of public companies. We'll also shift to discuss the strategies behind supply chains that are getting buoyed by investment technology, and if that builds more agility or resilience into the overall supply chain network. We'll also discuss the growing demand for quality, accessible data, and what does that mean to the industry overall.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.